Hey guys, welcome back. In our last video, we looked at how to set up the node server, and specifically we looked at the headers and the request body. In this video, we are going to be creating endpoints to handle requests from our clients. To do this, we are going to be installing a couple of dependencies. Not too many though, but the ones that will support the basic structure of the application we are building. And so, we shall be installing Express, which is going to be our back end framework. This is what we shall use to create our routes. Mongoose to interact with our library. Mongoose is basically an ODM, object document mapper. More on Mongoose later. Then concurrently is basically so we can run more than one npm script at a time. That is the server and the client simultaneously. And so to install these packages, we'll come here and do npm install express mongoose and concurrently, and we click enter. Now concurrently, we're going to make use of concurrently much later because we've not built the client side yet, but we can just go ahead and install it all the same. All right, so we are going to wait for it to install. We're going to wait for it to install now. Can take a couple of minutes if you've not installed it before. And when it's finished installing, it's going to appear in our package.json file. Let's just wait for it. And there you have it. Now if you come to our package.json file, you can see Mongoose, Express, and concurrently are installed. And as a reminder, our nodemon is listed. You can see our nodemon is listed as a dev dependency. All right, cool. The next thing I like us to do is to start making use of the packages we just installed. But before that, I'd like us to rename our server.js file to nodeserver.js. The reason for this is because we want to start constructing our Express server. But I still want us to keep the node server because at some point we might need to make reference to it. And so to rename it, we'll come over here and do rename. We're gonna call it node server.js, and we're gonna open up another file and we'll call it server.js. Cool. In our server.js file, we want to bring in what we're going to be needing. First, we're going to bring in Express. To do that, we simply do require Express, and we're going to save it in a variable which we're going to call Express. You can actually call it anything, but it's always cool to call it what will not be confusing. We're dealing with Express, so we're calling it Express. And so we are going to need two more things. So I want to copy this down, and the next thing we want to bring in is we are going to need Mongoose to interact with our database. Mongoose, and we're saving it as Mongoose. All right, you could use Mongo driver if you want For this project, I'm making use of Mongoose, maybe because I feel it's easier to use, or it's just my opinion. All right. And so we also want to bring in body passer. Body passer. So we say body passer. And we're going to save it in a variable which we are going to call body passer. All right. Now, body parser will allow us to take requests and get data from the body. Now, for instance, when we send a post request, we want to be able to get the name of that post. Recall what we went through to get access to the request body in our node server. But with this parser method, it's done cheaply, I tell you. Um, it's still the same process though, but we no longer need to, we no longer need to think about what's happening. But it's cool that we know what is actually happening. And so I guess this is actually what we need for now. Yeah. The next thing we want to do is initiate Express into a variable called app. And we'll say initiate, initialize, rather, gonna initialize, I said initiate. We want to initialize Express. All right. And to do that, we just say Express, and we're going to save it in a variable called app, like so. All right. Now, um, mm, mm, mm. now, the next thing I want us to do is to bring in the body parser. We've brought it in, but the body parser has a piece of middleware and that we should add. Let's say you come down here and say body parser middleware. This is going to be app. I'm going to do it like it's going to, the syntax is app that use, and we're going to bring in the body parser. I'm going to say that JSON body parser dot JSON. Now, if you are making use of Express versions that is the Express version that is slower than 4.16, then this can stay like this. This should stay like this. But if you look at my packet.json, I'm making use of Express 4.17. Now, with 4.16 and versions higher than that, I can actually come here and take away this one, take away this, and come over here and do Express. Because versions 4.16 upward comes with built-in middle function that is able to pass incoming requests, so we can do something like request dot body dot name, and it gives us access to this name. Now, earlier I mentioned the word middleware. If you are watching this video and you don't know what a middleware is, I want you to imagine that a middleware is a secretary or personal assistant to the server, and they have delegated authority and access to certain things originally controlled by the server, like the request, the response, and the next function in the application. Now imagine that the server, who is the CEO, has more than one secretary or personal assistant with the same delegated power. So what can the middleware do? What is this delegated power that the middleware can perform on behalf of the server? Number one, they can execute any code. They can make changes to the request response objects, and they can end request and response lifecycle. And also they can call the next middleware in the stack. All this they do on behalf of the CEO called the server. I guess they must be well paid. Now, in a big organization, you don't usually get to see the CEO directly, especially when there is a secretary in place or personal assistant. And so, as the request object arrives, it will be assessed by the middleware or couple of middlewares before it's handed over for final processing. One more thing, the order of middleware loading is important. Middleware that are logged first are executed first. Now, if the current middleware doesn't end the request response lifecycle, it must call the next function to pass control to the next middleware. Otherwise, the request will be left hanging and the big boss wouldn't be happy about that. And so, it does make sense to put the body parser at the top, as we shall see later. Now, the next thing we want to do, we need a MongoDB URI to be able to connect to our database. Obviously, we need a database, and so I will say database configuration. Now, I should be able to do mongoose dot connect to our database, like so. But we need a URI at this point, to connect to. How do we get that? We're going to create a file, and in that file, we're going to include our URI connection. Now, if we go over this place, we open a folder and we call it config. In that folder, we're going to create a file. In the folder, we're going to create a file. We're going to call the file keys.js. Now, in our keys, we are going to export. We do module that exports. We're going to have Mongo UI. We're going to set it to the string. So we say MongoDB / localhost 27017/MERN. Now, this MERN is actually the name I've given to the database. You can choose any name to call it. Now, from this point to this point, it should be the same. But for the database name, you can choose whatsoever name you want. And so we'll go back to our server.js file and we'll bring in that file. And we will say require, a path to that file config. We have the keys. Now, to access the Mongo URI, we say that Mongo URI. And so we'll set this, we'll save it in a variable which we're gonna call db. And so you can see this we're going to pass into the connect function. And if we connect, we'll now say that then. So what we're saying is if the connection is successful, then, literally, then we'll say successful, we'll say a function, gonna create a function here, the arrow, sorry, I'm gonna create a function making use of the arrow syntax, or we can just do directly, we can say console dialog. Now we use say Mongo DB connected successfully. Now this is a callback. This is a callback. So what we are saying is if this connection is positive, if this connection exists, then console Mongo DB connected successfully. All right. And so if it doesn't work out, peradventure the connection wasn't successful, then throw an error and we're going to catch the error. I'm going to say error, still using the arrow function, and say console log. I'm going to pass in the error. Notice I'm using, there's no parenthesis here. I'm just making use of the error because of ES6. And so we are connected. Now let's try and see what happens if we start our server. So let me say npm run server. See if all is well. So node mon server is on. We should have MongoDB connected on the integrated terminal here. Oh, there's a problem. Let's see. The request is not defined. Sorry, I left this here. I should take it off. I just used it to explain a body parser function. Yeah, there you have it. Mongo connected successfully. But if you look at this path, you see so many flags. So many flags. So for us to take all of this away, come here and say to take this and we say use create index. We're going to set it to true. Use find and modify. We're going to set it to false. Use new body parser. We're going to set it to true. And the last one, we're going to say use topology. I'm going to set it to true. Now, if you come back here, you will see that all the flags are gone. Now we have Mongo connected successfully. Now the next thing I want us to do is to set the server listening on a port. Now, if you recall, in the node server, we did server.listen like this. server dot listen. But in the Express server, it's going to be different because right here you can see that the whole of Express has been initialized in this app. Now, instead of saying server.listen, we'll come down here and say app.listen. And just as we did, we're going to give it the port to listen to, and we say const the variable name called port, and we're going to say process dot env dot port or 5000. Cool. Now all we need to do is to bring in this port here, this variable called port. We're going to bring it here, port, and we're going to add a callback function, and we say console.log. Now I'm going to make use of the backticks because I will be making use of the template literal. So I will say server is listening on port $, pair of curly braces. Now bring this variable, I'll bring it inside because the template literal allows us to insert variables. Cool. And if you look down, you can see server is listening on port 5000. Now, this line is new. What is process.env? Why not just specify the port 5000? I don't want to dwell on this so much because there are a couple of things we still need to cover, and so I'd like to explain it in a basic way like this. Our server has to listen to incoming requests that we have established, and it does that through a port. Now this port 5000 is local to my machine. Port 5000 works because it's free and available on my system, on this machine here. An application needs to be deployed in order for it to be useful. If it's not deployed, no one can use it. When we finish our food basket application, we are going to deploy it so that it can be used by so many other people. Now, when we write our code, we can never be sure where our application can be deployed. What if it's deployed in an environment that already has port 5000 occupied? With some other connections, our application is going to freeze. It will be looking for port 5000 and it will never find it. And so what if we add an option that says, if port 5000 isn't available, make use of any other connection port you find in the environment in which you are deployed. And so the process.env literally gives our server an option or options for connection. Hope that makes sense. And so if this is not available, then this other option is activated. Now that our server is up and running, I'd like us to get into models and schemas. So far, our server is able to listen to incoming requests, and we have Mongoose connected with our URI to the database. Now, basically, Mongoose translates objects in our code and represent those objects in MongoDB. But how does Mongoose do all of this? I want to explain like this. Now, imagine I am having a conversation with Mongoose, and I say to Mongoose, "Hey, what's up, Mongoose? I'd like you to help me with a task. I will be sending a couple of users over to you. All I need you to do is to get down their details, and I will ask for it much later." Mongoose looks up at me with smiles and replied, "It will be my pleasure, but on one condition. Both of us will sit and draw up a template. This template will contain all of the information I should expect from your users because I like to get prepared for them before they start coming. One more thing, if they bring something different from the template, I will not attend to it." "Not a problem," I replied. I said to Mongoose, "I will inform them before they come to you." "But hey, Mongoose, I'd like to confirm something. Now, how do you plan to handle the data that you will get from my users?" And Mongoose replied, "First, I will get a big file, and on the cover of the file, I will write in bold letters the name of your task. In this case, I'm going to call it items. And then I will take the template we both worked on and keep it inside this file. As soon as a user arrives, I will open up that file, make a copy of the template, and use it to register a new user. And this copy is finally sent to MongoDB for storage." Now, there are two items mentioned in this conversation that is very, very vital. One is the template. The second is the big file where we shall put the template. The template we shall rename as the schema. And that file, that big fat file, we shall call the model. Now, I'd like us to represent this conversation in code. To do that, we come over here and we're going to create a file. We're going to create a file. We're going to call it model. Sorry, it's going to be a folder which we're going to call model. And in that folder, we're going to create a file. We're going to call that file items.js. Now, in item.js file, we're going to bring in Mongoose. And to bring in Mongoose, we'll say require. You're saying require Mongoose. We're going to set it to a variable which we are going to call Mongoose. Cool. And then, based on that conversation, two things that we're going to bring in, two things that are very vital. The first is the model, and the second is the template. So that template, we said we've renamed it, and we are calling it, right now we're calling it the schema. And so we bring in the schema. A schema is a method that we get from Mongoose. And so we'll say, to access the schema, we'll say Mongoose that schema. That schema. Now, we're going to save this in a variable which we're going to call item schema. Cool. Now, remember, I promised Mongoose, based on our conversation, that I'm going to specify all the information that is going to be coming from the client. And so, to do that, in our template, which we've called the schema, which is actually called the schema, we're going to say name. The name, we're going to specify the type. We're going to specify the type, and we will say type of string. So whatsoever they enter in the place of name must be a string. And we will say required. We're going to set it to true, which means it's necessary, it's mandatory that this field is filled up. And so, aside from the name, we'll need the price of items, call it the price, the type of string. Sorry, the price is going to be number, and this field will also be required. So we're going to set it to true. True. And we can just copy this one down. Just copy down. And we change this to quantity. We're going to need the quantity. One. I didn't get that spelling right. I think quantity is quantity. We're going to set it to number required true. All right. And so the last thing I want us to add here is the timestamp. Now, I would have said created at. I would have added a created at field here, but Mongoose gives us an option where we can actually put a timestamp. We'll set it to true, and this automatically undo the created at and updated at field. All right, now we've specified the information that will be coming from the client. This is what Mongoose is expecting. Now, anything aside from this, Mongoose will reject. Later on, we'll go into validation, which is actually what is happening here. And so the next thing that we're going to look at now, the next important thing based on that conversation is that big fat file. That file where we're going to put all this template, we're going to place it inside that file. And that file, I said, we've renamed to the model. And also, we know that that model can be gotten from Mongoose. And so, we'll come down here and say mongoose dot model. And the first thing we're going to add in the model is the name of the model. And so we're going to say, we're going to call it item. Next to it is the template name. In this case, the template, which is called the schema here. This is the schema. And we're going to add the variable name item schema. And so we'll come over here and add the item schema right there. Now, the last argument is actually optional. Now, according to Mongoose documentation, an instance of a model is called a document. A Mongoose model, when saved, creates a document in MongoDB. Now, for a NoSQL database like Mongo, a database consists of collections, and every collections holds a bunch of documents. And so, when we finally save all of this is going to save it as a document under a collection. And so the last argument is actually the collection name. And so we're going to add the collection name. In this case, we're going to call it food basket. Cool. And so we're going to save all of this. We are going to save it in a variable which we are going to call item. And finally, we're going to export all of this file. We're going to export it so that it can be required in other files. And to export, we'll simply say module dot export equal to item. Looks good. Except that this require here is supposed to be required. Sorry about that. I know some of you guys already saw that. Alright, now the next thing I want us to look at, or that I want us to start doing now, is to start creating our endpoint. Now the endpoint handles requests from the front end via the route handler. Now what do I mean by that? Now to explain, I would come right here. Let me see here. I think this place is better. And I will say app.get method. I will put in this route, and second option takes a function. I will pass in the request and the response, and arrow function, and I will say response dot send. I'm just going to send a string that I'm going to call, let me just use this. Alright, send a string. I will say all items retrieved. Cool. Now what's actually happening here? Now you notice that I've made use of the app. The app here is the same app here. You remember we sorry, the same app here over here. This app is the same app here also. Now to make good sense of this app here, I'd like to reiterate what Express does. Now Express is a framework that makes it possible to handle multiple different HTTP requests at a specific URL. Now hold that thought for a moment. What exactly happens here? Now app, which is a variable, let me actually make this a variable. App, which is a variable, calls the express function, and when it calls that function is initialized in app variable. Now let me explain it like this. It's something like you are creating an object of a class, where express is just like class and app is the newly created object. And so wherever we write the variable app, we are calling the express function. And so if you come down here, as you can see, all this is app, we're calling express function here. We are saying express function, the body parser method in express function, that's what we're calling here. Oh, we need to change this. It's supposed to be pair of parentheses. If you've not done it, just change it. It's a pair of parentheses, JSON function. And down here, we're going to still call the app. We're saying app. We're making use of the get method, which is part of Express. We're making use of the get method. and we are sending a request and a response. And in that response, we are saying all item retrieved. So I'd like us to test this endpoint and see if it's true. To do that, we'll once again go to our postman. Now in postman, we'll click on the method get. And if we hit the send button, there you have it. You have all item retrieved. So what this means in essence is that we've been able to send a request, and if we come back to VS Code, the request response circle is completed. And now let's try and create other methods, and I'd just like to copy this down. I want to copy this down and I'll come over here and change this to post, the post method. Over here we're going to do the uh, put method, and at this point we're going to do the delete method. Delete. Now to make each endpoint unique, I would like us to label each endpoint. So here I'll come here and say item retrieved hearts. Then I'm going to add the URL. Get. Now I'll come here and I'll say item. This is a post request, a post method. Item posted hearts URL, and I'm going to call it post. And down here I would say I'll call this item. Now put corresponds to update, so I'll say item updated hearts updates. And for the delete, I'll do the same, and I'll say item deleted hearts deletes. Cool. Now to test the other routes, we'll go back to our postman, and we've done get. Let's try post. Oh, I did not change the string. Now this is supposed to be post. All item posted. So we change this to posted. We're going to change retrieved here. We're going to change it to all item, or item posted, item updated rather. And down here I'm going to change it to item deleted. All item posted. I guess item posted is just okay. So let's go back to our postman. Let's check for the post endpoint once again. Let's start from the get. We get item, all item retrieved. For post, item posted. Now it changes. Now the next one is put. item updated. Then we have delete. There you have it, item deleted. And so all our routes are true. But what if we want to add real data? Because so far we've not been working with real data. What we're making use of are hard coded. Now, to work with real data, we would have to import data into the database. And since our front end is not ready yet, there's a method that we can use to send data to our database. It's a command from MongoDB called Mongo import. Mongo import enables us to import data from a JSON file into MongoDB. And so to create that file, we'll come over here. First, we create a folder. We're going to call that folder seed data. And inside that folder, we are going to create a file which we're going to call item.json. Great. And so in the item.json file, we're going to put our data. And we're going to say name, because we'll actually need a name. We're going to say name. We're going to call the first name John. And the second thing will be price. Now you notice following the pattern of our schema. We have name, price. We're gonna say price is 50, just a figure. And the next thing we want to look at is a quantity. And that quantity, it's going to be 100. And so you can come over here, copy this, and we can now change the name here. We change it to Mandela. And here we change the price to 70, and the quantity we're going to change to 150. And the last name here, we're going to change it to Mary. And the price we're going to change to 30. The quantity we'll leave it at 100. I'm supposed, we are dealing with a food basket. Now, the food basket is actually an application that has a list of food items. So I guess I have to change this. Let me change it to food items. So we have cassava. There we have vegetable, and right over here we have beans. Yeah, it's better this way since we are dealing with food items. And so we'll now open another terminal in our integrated terminal, and we'll first cd into this file. To do that, we do cd dot dot the name of the file is seed data. Oh, sorry. It's spelled cd seed. Oh, I did the opposite. Seed data. So this should get us into the seed data folder, and we have access to the item.json file. And so in the item.json file, we're gonna type the command mongo imports, and we're gonna do dash dash. It starts from the database. We're gonna call our database the MERN database. Remember, we named the database as the MERN. You can call it whatsoever you want. And the next thing we're going to look at is the collection. Where do you want the data to, or what name do you want to call the data in MongoDB? And we'll call it collection. We're going to call the collection food basket. And last but not the least, we're going to call the file, and the name of our file is item.js, or item.json. Sorry, JSON. This should import this data into our database. There you have it. Imported 3 documents. And so I like us to check if this document is actually saved in our database. Now we'll go to our Compass. Now, if you've not downloaded Compass, it's part of the requirement for this application. You can go to their website and Mongo website and actually download this. I guess there's a version that comes with Compass. If you download Mongo for the first time, it comes with Compass. And so if you've downloaded Compass, I want you to open up Compass. I will do a refresh here and see. Yes, there you have it. The MERN, the database name, and the food basket, the collection. If you recall, we actually specified it here. We wanted the database name to be MERN, and we wanted the collection to be food baskets. And that's exactly what happened. And so if you open up the food basket, there you have it. The beans, the vegetable, and the cassava is saved in our database. And so we can start making use of real data. Let me take this off. And so if you come to our get request, the first request will be to get all the documents from the database and display it so that the user can see it. We are going to be making use of .find, .find, model.find. And talking about model, we are going to import model into this file, and we're going to say, let's come over here. Yes, say const. We're going to save the imports into a variable that we're going to call item. And so we're going to say require. We're going to require the path to the model. You have model and you have item. And so the model is initialized in this variable called item. And so we can come down here. Let's take this off. Instead of rest.send, we'll now say the model, which is the item dot find. This model here is the same model here. So we are referencing this file. This entire file is actually required and is saved as item, and we are making use of that item, which is actually the model file. And so we are saying model dot find. Now find takes three arguments, actually takes three arguments: the argument query filter, also known as the condition. The second argument is the query projection, which defines the field to include or exclude. But I don't want to go into all that right now. Um, I don't want us to stick with the first argument. And what that does is actually, since we are not giving it any condition, we are not giving it any query per se to search for, is going to do a general search. And so, which is exactly what we want. We want it to do a general get rather. It's going to do is a general search and get all the documents, because that's what we want to happen. We want to get all documents. So we're saying item.find. Now, if we say item.find, if the find is successful, then what next? What next? We are going to add a dot then. We are saying if the find is successful, then we're going to say dot then. Say dot then. We're going to make use of the dot then method. A dot then will, now listen, a dot then will return a promise. It takes up to two arguments: a callback function for the success, meaning that if the search, if the find is successful, the dot then takes in two arguments. The first argument is a callback for the success of find and failure cases of the promise. And then we'll say dot then, we'll bring in a function, and we say in this function, we're going to say, we're going to pass in the item. Now the item, this item here, you notice is different from this item here. This item here is the model. Now this item here starts with a lower case. This is an uppercase, so don't mix it up in case this is your first time of actually doing this. Now I can come here and use any name. I can use any name here to, it's just a variable. What I'm trying to say is if the item.find is successful, then whatsoever the success object, I want to save it. I want to save that success. I want to save that data in a variable. And the name of the variable that I'm saving it with is item. So we say, if it's successful, we say item. Then if I say item, I will not add a response. A response. I will not say response dot JSON. Now I'm adding response dot JSON because I want it to actually be visible to the user. And so I will pass the same item here. I will pass it here. Item. Cool. Now this will output the result if everything goes well. If it doesn't go well, then what? Now listen to this. When a promise rejects, in other words, if the promise does not give back success, if it fails, the control jumps to the closest rejection handler. In other words, if your code does not have, if your application does not have a code that's going to undo your rejection, it can cause your application to crash. Now, this is looking a bit like something that is abstract. To explain this, I'd like us to go back to our node server. I want to explain it with the node server. Now, if you recall, I said that request is a readable stream. It's a readable stream. And whenever whenever a listener is added to our request, data emits. You have the data, and we get the data as chunks, and all of that happens. But in when an error event triggers, it's like the same process. Let me just write a piece of code here. I will say request dot on. Now, what I'm saying is that if if there's an error in the request, there has to be a listener that will listen to the error event and treat that error accordingly. And so in Express, luckily for us, in Express, Express comes with built-in error handler. And in this case, um, you have the error, you have the error, and you have a function where we're passing the error, and it goes like this. And inside here is going to contain all manner of gibberish. Now, luckily, like I said, luckily for us, Express does not allow us to go through all of this. It comes in, it comes with built-in error handler. And that error handler we're going to make use of is a dot catch. And so let's go back to server.js. And so we're going to say dot then. Now, if there's an error, we're going to chain this and say then dot catch. So dot catch is like the error listener. It's like an error listener for the error events that I just explained. And so I'll say dot catch. I'll say dot catch. It will catch. Then I'll bring in the error. So function sorry, I will say response. Yes, there's going to be a response dot JSON. Before I say response dot JSON, before we do JSON response, I like to add a status, more on status in a bit. So I'll say response dot status, and I'll give it a 401. And then I'll now say dot JSON, and I'll pass in the same error. Cool. Now, let's test this in our Postman and see if we will actually get um, all the documents that we imported into our database. And so we'll go to Postman, and in Postman, let's check this. Let me refresh this. So let's go to Postman, and I'm going to do a GET request. And if I click on send, there you have it. You have all the data in our database outputted in JSON format. As you can see, is in JSON. Um, all is been displayed, which means it's successful. Now, back in VS Code, we're going to come to the other methods and see how we can actually use them with real data. But before I do that, I like to cancel this one out. We no longer need this. We don't need this, and take this one off as well. And so the next thing we want to do is we want to undo the post request. The post request. Now for post, we'll take this one out and we'll say that item dot create, and in item dot create with this function we are saying we're going to say request dot body. Cool. Now
this piece of code is saying that Mongoose should look into the item, which is the model. Now, it should look into the model and compare it with what is in the request body. Now, if it matches, then it will proceed. Now, the request body is made, we can actually access the request body because of this piece of code right here, here, here. It gives us the body parser middleware function that enables us to actually look into the request body. If you recall, in our node server, we had to go through a bit for us to be able to actually have access to the request body. But in Express, Express does it for us. And that's why we can come down here and actually do request.body. So we are saying Mongoose create a new document from the request body. And so if it's possible, if it's successful, then we'll add the success and the error handlers. Just copy that and we'll come down here and there you have it. Oh, sorry. We'll take this off because it's chained. So it should be like this. And so for the put method, which is actually update, we'll do the same. We'll take this off. Now for the put method, we are going to find by ID and update. We're going to use the method find by ID and update. And so we're going to say item dot find by ID and update. Cool. Now, what are we looking for? What are we? How do we find and update by ID? Now, for us to find and update by ID, I will come here and actually create a parameter for ID. Now, I want us to make this a little bit unique. Let me go back to our get, and I'm going to put get here. Here, I'm going to put post. Then here, I'm going to put update slash. And so I am saying this piece of code is saying Mongoose will first look into the model, create a copy of that model, and it will use that copy of the model to actually perform this function here. So it will find by ID, whatever ID that is coming from the request, it will use that ID to look for that particular document because you can have 1,000 documents. So for you to actually get the one you're looking for, you must identify it. And luckily for us, MongoDB, the database, the NoSQL database that we are using, allocates unique IDs to all the documents by default. So if you don't attach an ID, it will allocate an ID for each document. And with this ID, we can actually differentiate from one document to another. And so we will come here and we will say request dot params dot ID. And that's the first argument. The second argument is request dot body. Request dot body. And so the third argument is the third argument is we're going to do new. You're going to set it to true. Cool. Now let's run over this piece of code and actually see what's going on here. Now we are saying that Mongoose looks into the model. It looks into the model, and the next thing it would do is to find by ID and update, as it says. And then with this piece of code here, is going to grab that ID from the request body. And with this, we are saying create new, new. We are updating. And so we are adding something new to the document. And so if this is true, then once again, we're going to add our error and success handlers. So we're saying if everything is successful, then we'll do this. We could put item, then response.json. Now, I would like to do something, but first let's go over the deletes. Let's go over the delete. For delete, it's similar to update because on delete, we are going to, let me add delete here, delete slash, because we are going to require an ID as well. And so let's take this one out and we'll say item, our model, dot find by ID, find by ID and delete. And so we want to delete based on ID. And we're going to say request dot params dot ID. Cool. And so if you notice with this, we are only interested in the ID. But with our update, we have the ID and the request body because in updating, the piece of information which Mongoose we use to update comes with a request body. But in the case of delete, you will always have to delete something that is already in the database. And so we don't need to add a request body. What we are deleting is not in the body. What we are deleting is an ID of that particular document, which is what we have right here. This is it right here. And so once again, we had the success and the error handler. Now, I want to add something to this route. I'm going to say, I'm going to come here and I will say, now, I'm going to say success, true. Yeah. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to copy this and I will come over here and add it to all our code. I will explain a bit later. Then I'll come here also, put it right here, and also for the deletes. Looks good. And so what I'm trying to say is that if it's successful, then it will say success true and it will give us the data. Now let's go to our postman and try and run all of this once more. And let's go to postman. We've done the get request. The next will be the post. How do you post a request? Now, if you want to post in Postman, since we are not working with the front end yet, with Postman, if you want to post, let's copy this. Let's copy this. Copy. And then we'll go to the headers. The headers should have a content type of application slash JSON. We mentioned something. We mentioned the headers when we were working with the node server. Now, when this is done, then we can now go to the body. Oh, I had something here previously. All right, let me just leave it like this. I call this dried fish. All right, so you open. Okay, let me just do it. Let me just do it from the beginning so you understand what I'm doing. And so in the body, we're going to put a pair of curly braces, an object, and we're going to paste what we copied here inside this place. And notice we did not copy the ID because every ID is unique. So I cannot copy this ID because Mongo will see it as the same thing. And so I've left the ID field. And so I'm going to change this name to dry fish. Dry, dried fish, dried fish. Cool. And so I will post and see what happens. Ooh, there's a problem. There is a problem. Cannot post. Let's go back to Postman and see what's happening. It cannot post because it's the wrong route. Now let's go back and see what we used as a route for the post. We made use of post, that's slash post. So we'll come over here and do slash post. And if I send, there you have it. Now you can see success is true. And we have the item we just added, dried fish. Cool. Sweet. And so we'll go back to, before we go back, let's try the other methods. There's the put. Now for the put means updates. And let's assume we want to update this new addition to the document. Now before, just a minute before we go to the put, let's confirm that this dried fish is actually part of the document, part of all the document, part of the collection. And so let's go back to the gets. Very important. So the gets. Let's see. Let's see if it's been actually added. Let's see. All right, there it is. Dried fish. All right, so we can do put now. For put, change this to put or update rather. It should be update. But the method is put. And so for put, let's assume that we want to change the price. Now here you can see the price, it's 70. Now let's change the price to 100. 100. And so now if I hit send, I'm going to get an error because it will be looking for what to update. Like we said earlier, for it to update, it needs an ID. And so we're going to copy this ID right here. Now remember that in our route, we added an ID like this, and I call this a variable. So in place of this ID, which is a variable, I'm going to put the value of the variable. And so I'm going to put the ID of the dried fish. And so right now, if I were to send, we get a success true, and you can see the price has changed from 70 to 100. Cool. Now the next thing we want to test is our deletes. Now let's change this. All we need to do is change this to deletes. Deletes. and let's see what happens. Now, there are so many ways to implement delete. Now, I'm sending it back. I'm saying this is what is deleted. Now, you may wish to leave it empty so that when it's deleted, it shows an empty object. This is what I mean. Let's go back to VS Code. Now, if I come to delete, instead of sending it back to the user, I'm going to leave it empty. I'm going to leave it empty. And so if I go to Postman and um, let's go to get first. If you do get, if you do get, get, we get all our documents except for dried fish. You can see, except for dried fish, it has been deleted successfully. And so to explain what I just did in VS Code, if I were to delete vegetable, let's say I want to delete vegetable, copy, and I go to delete. I change this to delete slash. I put the ID and I say delete. As you can see, it gave us an empty object, signifying that there's nothing, it's empty. That particular document has been deleted. Like I said, there's so many ways to implement the delete. Depends on what you want. And so all the routes are set up. Let's go back to our VS Code. All our routes has been set up and they are working. Now, you can imagine if we are to keep all of this like this in this file, this will get filled up really fast. It's going to end up as a giant file. But with Express Router, we can put all this in a separate file. This is called modularization, and it has loads of advantages. You know, when you break things into smaller pieces of functionality, it gives us power to reuse code, for instance. It encourages collaboration. It has so many advantages. And so, for us to make use of the router, we'll actually want us to make use of the router in this application. And so, we'll go over here and create another folder which we're going to call routes. Routes. And in the routes folder, we are going to create a file which we are going to call item routes.js. Now, in our item routes.js, we're going to bring in Express because the router is a method in Express. It's gotten from Express. So the first thing we'll do is to require Express. We're going to require Express, and I'm going to save it in a variable which we're going to call Express. Cool. And then we're going to say Express dot router, and as usual, we're going to save it in a variable which we're going to call, save it in the variable which we're going to call router. Now, having done this, I want us to go to server.js, and we're going to copy all these endpoints. We're going to cut it out of the server file, all of this, just cut it, highlight up to the delete. Let's copy it and we'll come over to the item routes and paste. Now, instead of having app.post, app.get, since we've initialized the router into router, the same functionality with app, but a router gives us the ability to do the same thing an in another file instead of having everything concentrated on the server.js file. So we change this to router, change this to router. We'll come down here and change this also to router. Router. And finally come down and change this to router. Very important, we're going to export it so that we can require it from the server.js file. So we're going to say module.exports equal to router. And so we'll now go back to our server.js file. We'll come up here and we'll say, we're going to say, we're going to say const item. We're going to require that file, that router file, right here, item routes. Let's separate this and we'll call this, we're going to call this router files. Cool. Or router file. You can have several of them, but in this case, it's a file. So we say router file. And so we'll come down here and we're going to make use of a middleware. We're going to say app.use. Now, I'm going to say slash slash API, or we're going to say item item. Oh, sorry. Item item. I'm meant to put slash here. Item. And I will come over and say item. Now, what are we saying with this piece of code? We are saying, now, if you recall, when we got there's a problem here. Let's see what happened. This is not supposed to, it's not supposed to give us this. Let's see the problem. Identifier item has already been declared. Let's see. Did we declare it? Did we declare item? So let's call this item routes since we've declared item as the model. Oh. Now, since we don't have the endpoints here anymore, we're going to take this away. And there's something that we did not do here. Let's go back to our item routes. Now, if you would recall, we are making use of item. Now, this item is actually our model. So there's something else we need to bring in, and it's the model. So we'll say const item require that path to the model file folder, and then we have the item model. And so if we go back to our server.js, we'll now say Let's see if the error has gone. There you have it. Error is gone. And so here, what is happening at this point? We are saying that any path with item should transfer function or should transfer the route to the item file. What this means is that when we in our Postman we um, had something like this. We had post, we had gets, we had post, we had gets like this. Now, when you type this route, it brings you right here. It brings you right here. For the get, it brings you directly to this get. For the post, it brings you directly to this post. But now we are changing the direction of flow. We are saying that any typed route that has item should transfer us to this file, which we brought in here, which is actually this file here, the item route. And so what will happen is that the path now will now be, instead of having ordinary post, it will now be item to be item slash post. But this is not going to show here because automatically it brings that route and adds this route with it. And so let's test in our Postman. Let's go to Postman. Now for the get request, let's see if everything is okay. I guess so. Now for the get request, let's go back to Postman. Now, instead of writing get request, we are going to add item slash get. Let's see if it works. Oh, delete. I said delete. So change this to get, and then we try and get. There you have it. Working, still the same functionality. And so the same thing will go for all the other routes, because if we were to look at all the other routes, let's just go ahead and do it. Let's once again, let's do a post. Let's post. Let's post. Check your headers and make sure it's application slash JSON. Come to the body and let's take away the ID car server. Let's add um let's add dried fish. Let's add it back. Dried fish. And so let's see, all in order, all in order. And so let's post. Oh, changes to post. Item post. Successful. True. Now let's try with the put method. For the put, we change this to update. Updates. And we want to update our dried fish. This time we want to update the quantity. So we're going to change the quantity to 200. 200. And in this case, we're going to add the ID. Let's add the ID. Quantity has been changed, updated to 200. It works. The last thing would be to delete. Let's delete dried fish. And so we change this to delete. Delete. Empty object. All the routes are still working and working very fine. All right, so that's the back end, guys. It's now complete. Our backend has been completed. However, I will come back to the backend at some point after we have started the front end. The reason is because there's a particular endpoint that I will still add, but it's going to be after I have created the UI in the front end. I feel it will be easier to understand that way. And so, in the next video, we are going to start to create our React application. We are going to start to work in the front end to deal with this back end. This is a very simple back end. It can get more complex and difficult than this, but if you understand the basics, you will do very well in the complex stuff. Mm, that's my opinion. That's what I believe. When you are master of the basics, you will actually be master of the complex. And so I'm currently working on an Udemy course that takes you a bit deeper than all this, especially when dealing with stuffs like authentication and error handling methods. I'm currently working on a very exciting full stack application, just like this one, but it's more elaborate, an application that will dive a little bit deeper than what we have covered here. Watch out for the link to the course intro. It's coming out soon. Thanks for watching my video, guys, and see you in the next video.